Welcome back to Intro to Religion, PHL 1030. We are going over Tim Bain's book, Philosophy of Religion, a very short introduction. And this video is about Chapter 4, Divine Hiddenness and the Nature of Faith. So, why isn't God more obvious? Why isn't the existence of God more self-evident? Some people will claim it is, but most people say, well, I believe in God, but God's existence isn't obvious like the existence of the sun or the hand in front of your face. Why is that? So in this essay, in this video, we're going over the question for exam 1, part B, number 12. Which argument do you find more convincing? Nietzsche's on page 52, or Swinburne's on page 54. So Friedrich Nietzsche and Richard Swinburne, who they both comment on the fact that God isn't right in front of your face and easy to, it's not easy to tell that God exists. So Nietzsche says that implies there is no God, because what kind of a God, if God really existed, why would God hide himself? And Swinburne will say, if God revealed himself too clearly, then that would take away our free will, because if we knew God was watching, then we wouldn't act morally because it's the right thing to do. We would act morally out of fear of punishment from an obviously present God. So the question is, which argument do you find more convincing? So here is Nietzsche's argument on page 52. So here's what Nietzsche says. A God who is all-knowing and all-powerful, and who does not even make sure his creatures understand his intentions, could that be a God of goodness? Who allows countless doubts and dubieties to persist for thousands of years as though the salvation of mankind were unaffected by them, and who, on the other hand, holds out frightful consequences if any mistake is made as to the nature of truth. Would he not be a cruel God if he possessed the truth and could behold mankind miserably tormenting itself over the truth? So the implication is, if there was a good God, God wouldn't hold back the truth about his existence from us. Therefore, the fact that the truth about God is not obvious and readily had implies that there is no God, or at least there is no good God. Maybe there's a cruel God who likes to hide and punish people for not figuring out the riddles which are almost impossible to solve, but a good God would not do such a thing. That's what Nietzsche is arguing. So Swinburne says that, what I said before, if God showed himself, that would take away the motive for moral behavior, because then we would only be acting, we would be coerced into acting good because we know God's watching. Here's what Richard Swinburne says. Knowing that there was a God, men would know that their most secret thoughts and actions were known to God, and knowing that he was just, they would expect for their bad actions and thoughts whatever punishment was just. In such a world, men would have little temptation to do wrong. It would be the mark of both prudence and reason to do what was virtuous. So there'd be no genuine moral freedom if we knew God existed beyond a doubt. If God was right, watching us at all times, that would eliminate moral freedom. Does that seem plausible to you? So Tim Bain says, I think he brings up some good objections to Swinburne's argument. He says, for one thing, the idea that religious certainty leaves no room for temptation seems implausible, for those theists who regard God's existence as beyond doubt evidently remain subject to temptation. So, I personally believe God exists. I don't really doubt that, and yet I am subject to temptation. So maybe Swinburne was more saying, if God was right in front of you all the time, you know God exists, you believe God is watching all the time, but because God isn't right there, visible to your material eyes, it still leaves room for sneaking around and thinking you might get away with something, or at least testing God's patience. I know God's watching, but probably God doesn't care. So at any rate, it was the point of the question is just to get you to read both, to think about them, and then to express your opinion about them. Another interesting logical point that Tim Bain points out is, he says, theists have particular reason to question this claim, Swinburne's claim, for they regard God as a moral agent, but they typically deny that God is subject to temptation. So God isn't, God knows God's watching himself all the time, but he's not tempted. I don't think that is really such a good, it's an interesting point, but is God a moral agent? It's a good question. Can God sin? Is it possible for God to sin? I don't know. That's not part of the question here, but these are the kinds of questions that this class wants us to ask. But at any rate, that's enough information, I think, for you to formulate an answer for Exam 1, Part B, Question 12.